second segment, we'll get into world inhumanities and genocide.
Well, as you previously stated, my name is Alana McLaughlin. I am 13 years old, and I just finished middle school, so I will be attending the National School of the Arts in the fall semester. I am heavily involved in plenty of organizations and summer camps, even though I'm just staying in town this summer, and many organizations. So I stay out the house a lot, ranging from church to neighborhood activities to marching band and etc. And so I stay a pretty busy person. But world inhumanities and genocide, that's such a delicate topic because so many lives are lost that you really have to tread lightly when talking about something where millions and millions of people died, and it's hard to execute. And so I'm wanting to execute it, but I believe that I can. I believe that I can. I won't be able to say I understand why that happened because none of us truly understand, but I can tell you what happened, and I can give you timelines and etc. And so I want to get a bit into a word inhumanities and the difference between word inhumanities and genocide. Word inhumanities are just those cruel acts made by civilians that isn't genocide. Like genocide is a mass killing of a race, and the purpose is to get rid of that race.
Eliminate that race.
For example, the Holocaust. Hitler wanted to get rid of Jewish people. The difference between word inhumanity and genocide, say slavery would be word inhumanity. They didn't necessarily want to kill us off, they wanted to work us and put us to use. And so they weren't killing off African Americans, but forcing them to do hard labor, which sadly means that it's not genocide, even though it's still as bad as genocide. And so that's the difference between that. So if you hear me talking about slavery, you're like, oh, why didn't she include that as genocide? It's not technically genocide. It's a cruel act of civilization. It's one of the worst things to happen in U.S. history, but it's not genocide. And so another good example of the difference between world inhumanity and genocide would be, say, genocide, the Rwandan genocide. Genocide. And word inhumanity, the Orlando shooting at the gay club that just happened. Now, that might be genocide. We don't know yet because people are thinking that it's either an attack on U.S. soil or that the shooter was trying to rid the world of gay people. So it's just conflicting. So we don't truly know at this point.
And so in a real sense, Alana, as we make preparations for our first commercial break here this morning, that this whole idea of world inhumanities, that is man inhumanity to man or woman's inhumanity to woman, that's not only important in terms of dealing with this whole issue of genocide, but I think we recognize that when we talk about genocide, we're talking about an attempt to bring a conclusion to something, and it's very rarely that we can assign the name genocide to many events, but I think that what you've done this morning is to come up with a number that you'd like to deal with in reference to it. And what we're going to do, we're going to take our first commercial break, and I think that basically that's what you want to do this morning. Is that the
that's what
area
I plan on
that
doing.
You want to do?
That's what
and so what we'll do is we'll take our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with world inhumanities and genocide. And I want you to know that I've seen you in terms of pulling all of this information together, and I'm encouraged by knowing that you've got that information available to us. And I think that you always had it available when you got to this particular point. And so what we're going to do, we're going to take our first commercial break, then we'll come back for our 8-minute segment. And that 8-minute segment will give you an opportunity to elaborate further up on world inhumanities and deal with the issue of genocide. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Man's inhumanity to man, bullying or whatever, and etc. You know,
I'm thinking more wide.
Okay,
about her phone, wide scale crap, like trail tears, stuff like that.
Okay, yeah. Well, Well, you go for it. Anything that you've got to deal with, and keep your legs still, and don't rock the chair.
Okay.
And then we'll come back and I'll introduce it. We got 7 minutes and 55 seconds. You see that clock there? 7 minutes.
No, I don't see the clock.
I mean, you see it.
I mean, I see it now, but that's why I like have really bad time perception. Like either I'll talk over or I'll stop.
Well, that's the clock here. You see too. You're right. Oftentimes it's down in 7 minutes and 55 seconds in this segment, and so when we come back, we're gonna have that time. And so you try to divide your time and articulate it, and don't shake the camera, chair, twist your legs or anything. Just keep still.
I know.
You know how to do it. You've done it enough. You know. But as soon as he gives me the signal, we're going to start back, and I'll welcome them back. And you ready? Get ready. Give me the signal. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The topic is World Inhumanities and Genocide, and we're talking to Alana McLaughlin, who has already given us information in reference to her background, education, and some of her experiences. And so, Alana, let's pick up where we left off by having you to talk about some of the things that you consider to be world inhumanities. That is, throughout all of the world, how people have reacted in reference to their fellow man. And then we'll get into some of the more delicate issues in dealing with genocide, an attempt to try to eradicate a race. But first, let's deal with simple world inhumanities.
Well, if you're just tuning in the first segment, I mentioned what the difference between a world inhumanity and genocide was. Genocide is killing off a race with the purpose being to eradicate the world of that race. And a world inhumanity is not necessarily to rid the world of that race, but to cause that race pain or suffering. For instance, a world inhumanity would be slavery. They didn't try to kill us all off, but they wanted to work us and punish us and etc. But they weren't just going around killing off African Americans. An example of genocide would be the Rwandan genocide, which I will talk about in the next segment, which was the Tutsis and the Hutus in Rwanda. Another example of a world inhumanity would be the shooting at the gay club in Orlando earlier this week. Now, this might end up being genocide, though, because we don't know necessarily what the shooter's motive was. Like his father was saying that he was trying to get rid of gay people, while U.S. government is saying that it was an attack on the U.S. So no stories are very solid, but I guess since it's a new story and it's still developing, in the coming days we'll probably have an answer as to whether it was world inhumanity or genocide. But for right now, I'm going to count that as world inhumanity. Like a man just wanted to go and kill people and make people suffer. A big world inhumanity that a lot of people in the U.S. are familiar with, and especially Tennesseans, is the Trail of Tears. If you're unfamiliar with the Trail of Tears, it is when Andrew Jackson sent Native Americans west of the Mississippi River to be able to take their land. And he did this during the winter where conditions were harsh and they were on foot. They were not sent off with food and drink and clothing at that. They were just one with nature, and that's not good in the winter, and especially if you're walking. And so they had to walk miles and miles and miles, and this was labeled the Trail of Tears. And I don't think I have to go into explaining why it was called the Trail of Tears, because I think there would be plenty of tears if you had to walk and walk and walk miles with barely anything, no food, watching people all around you die, your family die, if you don't die first, and things like that. So that's a big example of world inhumanity. Now, Andrew Jackson wasn't necessarily trying to kill off the Native Americans. Like I said, he was trying to get their land, but he knew that it would cause them great suffering, but he wasn't just sitting there ordering people to just take out every Native American they saw. That would make this be genocide. But since he did not do that, this is just world inhumanity. Another big example, Columbine, was world inhumanity. Say that the two shooters at the school weren't trying to rid the world of their students, of their classmates. They were trying to simply hurt them or kill them. And so that makes that a world inhumanity, and it's a word inhumanity because it was so widespread and it got so much media coverage. Another one, 9/11. Terrorists weren't trying to rid the world of white people. They were trying to wreak havoc in the U.S., and they unfortunately did. This is another thing that I wish could be counted as genocide, but we never know, because the bombers or whatever, we don't know if they were, what their motives really were. We know that it was an attack on U.S. soil. And so those are examples of world inhumanities, and it's just, it's as bad as genocide. It's just that there's a thin line between, I want to cause you suffering and I want to get rid of you. Like, I can argue and bicker with you, but I don't want you to leave. Like,
you know, Lana, I take in dealing with world inhumanities, I think one of the most important areas here that you mentioned to me earlier has to deal with war. Now, when you consider war in reality is man's inhumanity to man. Would you concede that? And by conceding that, then you can simply look at the various kinds of wars that we've become involved in. And even on a more personal level, I think that when you talk about inhumanity toward man, you can look at some of the things that happen in your everyday life, dealing with children, bullying, and all of those things. All of those things, while certainly they're not as significant in terms of their outcomes, they are important in terms of individuals who've been talked about, who've been bullied, who've been pushed around, and et cetera. And so I would imagine that you would include